Lewis avait pris un début de saison un peu difficile. On avait certainement sous-estimé le challenge pour lui de passer de l'environnement Mercedes chez nous. Il est en train de revenir assez fort. Il a été très très performant les 4-5 dernières qualifs à part Spa, où à Spa il a fait une course exceptionnelle. Donc je pense qu'on va aussi bénéficier de ça, du retour en forme de Lewis.
What is really happening with Lewis Hamilton in Ferrari? Why does your boss Frédéric Vasseur, usually diplomatic, has been so direct with his words behind Hungary practices? Today we are going to unravel the truth behind statements that have shaken the whole paddock and that could redefine the immediate future of the most legendary team of Formula One. Vasseur is not a character that is characterized by free provocation. His style, generally moderate, reflects more the mentality of a methodical engineer than that of a media agitator. Therefore, to choose to speak with such frankness after the practices in Hungaroring reveals a level of frustration that can hardly be hidden. And, more importantly, an urgent need to mark a limit, to put pressure where you think it takes to change the course. Hamilton, meanwhile, landed in Ferrari with a powerful narrative behind him. Not only was the heptacampion looking for new horizons, it was also the emblem of a new era for Ferrari. The union between one of the best of all time and the most iconic team of motoring promised to be historical. But what in paper seemed like a perfect fusion, on the track it has turned out to be a challenged symphony. The first races made it clear that the adaptation would not be immediate. The times by return, although competitive at some times, were accompanied by inexplicable mistakes and execution failures under pressure. The practices in Hungary seemed the opportunity for all that to be left behind. However, the story was repeated, speed without consistency. And that is where Vasseur breaks silence. When referring to Friday's classification, his tone changes. The atmosphere is positive, but it is clearly not the result we expected with Lewis. This seemingly diplomatic phrase hides a much deeper dissatisfaction load. For a team like Ferrari, which has been rebuilding its reputation for years, it is not enough to have a legendary name behind the wheel. They need results, and they need them now. Hamilton is not being criticized for his talent. That is not in doubt. What is at stake here is its ability to execute surgical precision in an environment that does not forgive. The difference between left the third or 10th can be 3/10, but those 3/10 can change the course of a season. The pressure not only comes from the equipment address, also from within the garage, where Charles Leclerc remains the technical reference. Each session in which Leclerc manages to extract more from the same car is a silent reminder that Hamilton, despite his experience and titles, is still in an integration phase. And this is where the true narrative conflict begins, not between Hamilton and Ferrari, but between the Hamilton that came to lead and the Hamilton that fights to understand a car that does not respond as expected. To what extent is an adaptation problem? And when does it become a symptom of a deeper disconnection between pilot and machine? The situation is aggravated when we understand that Vasseur, when making his impressions public, is pressing not only Hamilton, but also the technical team that surrounds him. It is not a unilateral criticism. It is a call to action. To all, from engineers to the star pilot, raise their level. Because if they do not, this story by Ferrari and Hamilton could become another disappointment within a long list of failed projects in Maranello. Lewis Hamilton's performance in Ferrari cannot be analyzed only from the chronos. It would be a technical and narrative error. What is happening goes beyond the 10th lost or the failed turns. It is a phenomenon that combines mechanical complexity, mental adaptation, and institutional pressure. And therefore, it demands a dual analysis, technical and psychological. Let's start with the mechanical. The SF25 is an extremely sensitive car. Inherits some of the virtues of the SF24, such as stability and technical curves, but has incorporated a series of aerodynamic adjustments that radically change the way in which it must be piloted. While Charles Leclerc, formed entirely under the Ferrari ecosystem, has managed to synchronize with this philosophy, Hamilton has collided in front with a behavioral geometry that does not align with its instincts. One of the key points has been the adaptation to the way in which the SF25 manages weight transfer. Hamilton, traditionally known for his aggressiveness modulated in braking and early traction, has had to relier techniques that he had not needed for years in Mercedes. In Vasseur's words, the battle is very close. We talk about hundredths or even thousandths, which suggests that the margin of error is microscopic. And on that margin, Hamilton is failing. But the most revealing fact came when Vasseur said Hamilton was just behind Charles, although he later exceeded the track limits. This phrase, said almost casual tone, hides a critical reality. Hamilton can match or overcome Leclerc in pure speed, but fails to assemble a complete turn without errors. This is not a talent problem, but of execution. In other words, Hamilton still does not master the fine details of SF25. And in Formula One, details are everything. Now let's move on to the psychological component, probably the most underestimated but the one that is having the most impact on this process. Hamilton, in his own words, has described this period as the most intense season from the professional point of view. An overwhelming statement coming from someone who has dealt with political scandals, infarction ends and media pressure for almost 2 decades. But what differentiates this stage is not only the competitive demand, but the cultural shock. Ferrari is not Mercedes. Ferrari is a religion. And living within that structure requires an emotional absorption capacity that not all champions have managed to develop. He confessed without reservations, "I definitely need to disconnect, recharge energies, spend time with children and laugh. I probably cry a little and I think that is also healthy." It is not just an emotional statement. It is a brutally honest window to the accumulated tension. In Ferrari, each error is amplified. Each gesture is interpreted. And every word dissected. Hamilton is living that in his own flesh, and for the first time he is openly recognizing the emotional burden of being the Maranello banner. And this is where the crisis acquires another dimension. We are not facing a finished pilot or before an impossible car. We are facing temporary dissonance. Hamilton knows what he should do, but the car and context do not allow him to execute it with the naturalness of previous years. And that is generating a loss of gradual confidence. Ferrari, meanwhile, does not have time to wait for this adaptation to occur organically. The external pressure of the media, the tifosi and the sponsors demands immediate results. Vasseur, with his statements, is marking a red line. If Hamilton fails to translate his experience in tangible performance, it will be impossible to protect him before an environment that does not forgive mistakes. And that expectation clashes frontally with the current reality. A complicated car, a pilot who still does not achieve full confidence, and an environment that demands perfection every weekend. So what can happen if this pattern is maintained? The consequences go beyond simple runways. If Hamilton fails to stabilize its performance, the narrative will be invested. If El Salvador de Ferrari is considered, it can begin to be perceived as an anomaly, a champion out of tune with the identity of the Scuderia. And that change of perception can be lethal in an organization as symbolically loaded as Ferrari. It is not unreasonable to think that they begin to question decisions, not only around the pilot but also on the general course of the project. Recall that the Leclerc-Vasseur duo represents continuity. Hamilton, on the contrary, is an external disruption. If the yield does not justify that disruption, the political balance within the team can lean against him faster than he expects. In addition, this has a direct impact on the 2025 grid. If the Ferrari-Hamilton project does not take off, other teams will observe carefully. The idea that a pilot with 7 world titles can fail to adapt to a new environment awakens all kinds of analysis and comparisons. Is Ferrari the problem? Or is Hamilton who has lost part of his competitive edge? That question, beyond sports, affects contracts, sponsorships, and future decisions in the F1 offices. All this makes Hungary a silent turning point. It may seem another weekend of the championship, but it is, in reality, a mirror. A moment of truth in which Ferrari and Hamilton must decide what they want to be. A competitive team with corrigable problems? Or one more case of dissonance between individual talent and organizational structure? And now, the big question is open for everyone. Are we witnessing the principle of Hamilton's rebirth in Ferrari? Or the slow collapse of a project that never found the right tone? Frédéric Vasseur has put the cards on the table. And his message is not just a technician. It is existential. Ferrari no longer has time for processes. The clock runs, the pressure goes up, and the story does not expect. The Scuderia wants to return to the top, and no matter how many titles a pilot brought under the arm, if it cannot translate them into results, it will quickly become part of the problem, not the solution. Hamilton, meanwhile, faces one of the most demanding evidence of his professional life. Not because he lacks talent, speed, or motivation, but because now you have to reinvent yourself. It is not enough to be fast. It has to be resilient. You have to meet its essence within a culture that does not accommodate anyone. Ferrari demands integration, but also submission to a collective vision. And that, for a pilot who for more than a decade led projects in his image and likeness, represents a deep conflict. And this is where this story ceases to be just from Lewis and Ferrari. Because it plays something that goes much further. Can the past live with the future? Can a legend remain great in an environment that is not molded to your style, but forces you to change? The current Formula One, more than ever, demands brutal adaptation. immediacy in the results, and a storm-proof psychology. And the Hamilton-Ferrari case is the perfect mirror of this new era. Now I want to know what you think. Is Ferrari too honest with Hamilton? Or is you simply demanding what any top team should demand a multiple world champion? Do you think Lewis will reverse this narrative before the internal credit is over? Or are we seeing the first steps towards an inevitable breakup? Leave it in the comments.